All right, class. So today we are going to talk about blood typing. And when we are learning about blood typing, we need to understand that there are two very important blood grouping systems. The first one is ABO system, and we will look at ABO system right now. And then the second one that we will talk about is called the RH system. So apart from the ABO system and the RH system, there are other systems of blood grouping as well. But for testing purpose, we will just learn about the ABO blood system and the RH blood system. Okay, so let's get started. According to the ABO system, there are four types of blood: A, B, AB, and O, as you see on the left hand column. Now, if a person has blood type A, how does that blood look like? So I have drawn out an RBC which looks like a flattened disc, and you can see that on the surface of RBC there are A antigens present. So a person with blood type A will have A antigens on the surface. A person with blood type B will have B antigens on the surface. A person with blood type AB will have both A and B antigens on the surface. And a person with blood type O will not have any antigen on the surface of RBC. So these are the cells that you see that I have drawn. These are RBC cells. Okay. So these are the surface antigens that we find. How about the antibodies? Well, I want you to understand one thing. If an antigen is present on the surface of RBC, I repeat, if an antigen is present on the surface of RBC, the person's body recognizes that antigen as self and does not produce antibodies against it. Does that make sense? So a person with blood type A has A antigen on the surface of RBC, and this person's body will not produce anti-A antibody against it because antigen A is self. The body knows A antigen. It recognizes the A antigen as its own. However, his body will produce anti-B antibody. Similarly, Rian, sorry class, Rian, go inside. Sorry class, inside. Sorry class. However, a person with type B blood has B antigen, and in his plasma there will be anti-A antibody. A person with blood type B will not have any antibody in the plasma, and if you look at a person with O blood type, he will have both anti-A and anti-B antibody in the plasma. Okay, so this was the very basic of ABO blood system. Moving on to a diagram that I took from your book. So let's look at the different types. If you look at the second column, you see blood type A, which has antigen A on the surface, denoted by the blue balls. Person with blood type A will have anti-B antibody in the plasma, denoted by the purple Ys. The Ys represent the antibodies. Similarly, a person with blood type B will have B antigens on the surface of RBC, as shown by the purple triangles, and he will have anti-A antibody. A person with blood type AB will have both antigen A and antigen B on the surface, as shown by the blue balls and the purple triangles, and no antibody in the plasma. And a person with blood type O will have no antigen on the surface of RBC, but he will have both antibodies in the plasma. If you look at the bottom row in blue, let's not look at it right now. We will talk about it a little later in this lecture. All right, moving on to the RH system. The RH system is different from the ABO blood system, and there are two types of RH blood type. One is RH positive and the other one is RH negative. So here I'm going to draw a RBC, and a person who is RH positive will have D antigen. It's also RH factor is also called D antigen. I'll just write it here. RH factor is also called D antigen. Okay, so this person will have D antigen on the surface of RBC. A person who is RH negative will not have any D antigen on the surface of RBC. What about the antibodies? A person who has D antigen, obviously his body will recognize D antigen as self, so he will not produce any antibody. So no anti-D antibody. A person who is RH negative will also, listen, hear me please. A person who is RH negative will also have no anti-D antibody. No anti-D antibody. So unlike the ABO system, this is slightly different. Doesn't matter whether you are Rh positive or Rh negative. In either case, you will not have any anti-D antibody. However, an Rh negative person can produce anti-D antibody on prior exposure to the positive blood. So this is a usual case. However, this person can produce anti-D antibody if exposed to Rh positive blood. Okay, so the Rh negative person needs to be exposed to Rh positive in order to build these anti-D antibody. If the person is never exposed to the Rh positive blood, then he will never ever make anti-D antibody. So the key point here is whether you are Rh positive or negative, you will not have any anti-D antibody in the first place. All right. So let's talk about a person who is A positive. Let's talk about an A positive person. So I'll just write here A positive. So I draw the RBC. On the surface of the RBC, you will have A antigens, and he's positive, right? So you will also have the D antigens. A person who's A negative will have only A antigens on the surface and no D antigen. In both cases, both A positive and A negative person will have anti-B antibody in the plasma. Antibody in the plasma and no anti-D antibody. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So a person who's O positive, an O positive person will have only D antigen on the surface and no antibody. Sorry, my bad. And both anti-A and anti-B antibody in the plasma. If a person is O negative, he will have nothing, absolutely nothing on the surface of RBC, and he will have anti-A antibody and anti-B antibody in the plasma. Does it make sense? All right, let's move on. So this is again from the textbook. So we see three columns, right? So the first column In pink, it's talking about the type of erythrocytes. It's talking about erythrocytes. So we look at red blood cells. Rh positive blood type does have the D antigen on the surface. And if you are Rh negative, you have no D antigen on the surface of RBC. In the plasma, for Rh positive blood, there is no anti-D antibody as we talked about before. However, the plasma, if you look at the plasma of Rh negative blood type, there is anti-D antibodies developed only after prior exposure. Do you see that? So they have the antibodies only after they are exposed. So this is really, really important. All right. Now, moving on to a very, very important concept. Blood transfusion. Now, we want our blood to flow, right? So blood should be very, very fluid, and it should be flowing at all times, because we know that blood carries oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrients, wastes, hormones, everything is transported via blood. So we want our blood to flow. Now, there is a term that I want to introduce, and the term is called agglutination. Agglutination means clumping of blood. Do you think that's a good thing? No, it's not a good thing. We do not want agglutination. And when does agglutination take place? Well, if there is a reaction between the same antigen and same antibody. So if you have, let's say, antigen A on the surface of RBC, and you get anti-A antibody. So you have antigen A on the surface, and you also get anti-A antibody. They are same, right? AA. So they clump with each other by a process called agglutination, and know that agglutination is bad. I want you to remember, same antigen, same antibody, not good. Same antigen, same antibody, not good. So now we will look at some scenarios of blood transfusion. A lot of students, I usually draw this out on the whiteboard, and a lot of students get confused when it comes to blood transfusion. So I will go slowly, and I want you to take notes, and maybe if you have time, I recommend you listen to this lecture, a few times to get the concept well. Okay. So in case of blood transfusion, there is a donor and there is a recipient. A donor is a person who donates blood. A recipient is a person who receives the blood. When we are looking at transfusion, I really, really want you to understand that whoever is the donor, his antigen is important. And whoever is receiving the blood, his antibody is important. So, donor's antigen, recipient's antibody. Say it again. Donor's antigen, recipient's antibody. Donor's antigen, recipient's antibody. I'll stop this video here and then start with a new one.